The gunshot that killed Willa Zimmerman's father still echoed in her mind as her horse stumbled into the darkness, finally collapsing beneath her somewhere in the Nevada Territory wilderness. She hit the rocky ground hard, dust filling her mouth as she gasped for air. The mare didn't rise again. Willa crawled to the animal's side, placing a trembling hand on its heaving flank, but she already knew. 3 days of riding without proper rest or water had taken their toll. The horse had given everything it had to carry her away from the men who had murdered her father and burned their small ranch to the ground. Now she was alone in the darkness, miles from anywhere, with nothing but the clothes on her back and her father's old revolver tucked into her belt. She was 22 years old, and she was certain she was going to die out here. Willa forced herself to stand, swaying on unsteady legs. The September night air carried a chill that cut through her thin cotton dress. She'd fled so quickly she hadn't even grabbed her coat. Above her, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet, beautiful and utterly indifferent to her suffering. She started walking, though she had no idea which direction would lead to safety. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. The men who'd killed her father had been looking for something, demanding to know where he'd hidden money he didn't have. When he couldn't tell them what they wanted to hear, they'd shot him. She'd only escaped because she'd been in the barn when they arrived, and her father's final screams had given her enough warning to flee. Tears streamed down her face as she stumbled over rocks and through brush. Her legs felt like they might give out at any moment. How long had it been since she'd eaten, since she'd slept? Time had become meaningless, just a blur of fear and grief and exhaustion. Then she saw it. A small flicker of orange light in the distance. A campfire. Every instinct told her to be cautious, but desperation overrode fear. She moved toward the light like a moth drawn to flame, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. As she got closer, she could make out a figure sitting near the fire, and beyond that, 3 horses tethered to a line strung between 2 scraggly trees. A man. Alone. That could mean safety, or it could mean a different kind of danger. But Willa was past the point of having choices. Her body was shutting down, and if she didn't find help soon, she'd collapse out here in the wilderness and never wake up. She must have made some sound because the man's head snapped up. In one fluid motion, he was on his feet, his hand hovering near the gun at his hip. "Don't shoot," Willa called out, her voice cracking. "Please, I need help." She took another step forward and the world tilted. Her knees buckled and she braced herself for the impact of hitting the ground again. Instead, strong arms caught her. "Easy now," a deep voice said, steady and calm. "I've got you." Willa found herself looking up into a face illuminated by firelight. The man appeared to be in his mid-20s, with dark hair that needed cutting and several days' worth of stubble on his jaw. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, a clear gray that held none of the cruelty she'd seen in the men who killed her father. "My camp is safe," he said, holding her steady as her legs threatened to give out again. "You can trust me until morning." Those words, spoken with such simple certainty, broke something inside her. A sob escaped her throat, and then she was crying in earnest, all the terror and grief of the past 3 days pouring out of her. The man didn't speak, just held her upright and let her cry. When the storm of emotion finally subsided, leaving her hollow and exhausted, he guided her to sit by the fire. "When did you last eat?" he asked, already reaching for a pack near his bedroll. "I don't know," Willa whispered. 2 days, 3. He pulled out a cloth-wrapped bundle and opened it to reveal strips of dried beef and some hardtack. "Start slow," he said, handing her a small piece of the meat. "Your stomach won't thank you if you eat too much at once." Willa took the food with shaking hands. The beef was salty and tough, but it tasted like salvation. She forced herself to chew slowly, to not wolf it down like her body demanded. The man moved to his saddlebags and produced a canteen. "Small sips," he said, passing it to her. The water was warm and had a metallic taste from the canteen, but Willa had never tasted anything better. She followed his instructions, taking small drinks even though she wanted to drain the entire container. As the immediate edge of her hunger and thirst began to fade, Willa became more aware of her surroundings. The camp was neat and organized, the fire contained in a proper ring of stones. The man's gear was well maintained, his saddle cleaned and oiled, his bedroll arranged on a ground cloth. Everything spoke of someone who knew how to survive in the wilderness, who took care of his equipment and himself. "I'm Ryder Ashford," the man said, settling himself on the other side of the fire. He kept a respectful distance, she noticed. "I work as a scout and guide, mostly for wagon trains and mining parties. I'm heading to Unionville, Nevada to meet my next clients." "Willa Zimmerman," she managed, her voice still rough. "I'm from a ranch about 3 days' ride south of here, or I was." The tears threatened again, but she forced them back. "My father was killed. Men came looking for money we didn't have." Ryder's expression darkened. "These men, they follow you? I don't know. I just ran. My horse gave out about a mile back." He stood and walked to the edge of the firelight, staring out into the darkness. Willa watched him, noting the way he moved with easy confidence, his hand never far from his gun. After a long moment, he returned to the fire. "We'll keep watch tonight," he said. "I'll take first shift." "You need rest more than I do." "I can't ask you to do that," Willa protested, though exhaustion made her words weak. "You're not asking, I'm offering." He pulled his bedroll closer to her. "You sleep here by the fire. Take my blanket too, it'll get cold before morning." "What about you?" "I've slept in worse conditions." He gave her a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Besides, I don't sleep much anyway." Willa wanted to argue, but her body had other ideas. The moment she lay down on the bedroll, wrapped in the wool blanket that smelled of horse and wood smoke and something distinctly masculine, her eyes began to close. She fought it for a moment, some part of her insisting it wasn't safe to sleep in a stranger's camp, but exhaustion won out. Her last conscious thought was that Ryder Ashford's eyes were kind. When Willa woke, the sun was already well above the horizon, painting the desert landscape in shades of gold and red. She sat up with a start, disoriented and confused, her heart racing until memory came flooding back. Ryder sat near the fire which had been built up again. He was cooking something in a small pan, and the smell made Willa's stomach clench with hunger. "Morning," he said, glancing over at her. In the daylight she could see him more clearly. He was tall and lean, built like someone who spent most of his time on horseback. His clothes were worn but clean, and he had the weathered look of someone who lived outdoors more than in. "You let me sleep all night," Willa said, and it wasn't quite an accusation but close. "You needed it." He divided what turned out to be beans and salt pork between 2 tin plates. "Eat. Then we need to talk about what happens next." The food was simple but hot and filling. Willa ate slowly, savoring every bite, while Ryder watched the horizon with that same alert awareness he'd had the night before. "I can't go back to the ranch," Willa said when her plate was empty. "Those men might still be there, and even if they're not, everything is gone. They burned it." "You have family anywhere, friends who could take you in?" Willa shook her head. "My mother died when I was 12. My father was all I had. There's an aunt back east in Philadelphia, but I haven't seen her since I was a child. I don't even know if she's still alive." Ryder was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee. "Unionville isn't much of a town, but it's growing. Mining booms bringing people in." You might be able to find work there, at least until you figure out what to do next." "I don't have any money," Willa said quietly. "Everything I owned burned with the ranch." "I'm heading that way anyway," Ryder said, as if that settled it. "You can ride with me." "Why would you do that?" Willa asked, studying his face. "You don't know me. I could be lying about everything." "You could be," Ryder agreed. "But you're not. I've met enough liars in my life to know the difference." He stood and started packing up the camp with efficient movements. "Besides, I couldn't live with myself if I left you out here alone." Willa felt something tighten in her chest, an emotion she couldn't quite name. Gratitude, certainly, but something more. This man, this stranger, was helping her without asking for anything in return. In her experience, that kind of kindness was rare. "Thank you," she said, and the words felt inadequate for what he was offering. Ryder just nodded and continued breaking down the camp. An hour later, they were mounted and riding north. Ryder had given her his spare horse, a sturdy buckskin mare with kind eyes. Willa hadn't ridden bareback since she was a girl, but she managed well enough, though every muscle in her body ached from her previous 3 days of hard riding. They rode in silence for most of the morning, Ryder setting an easy pace that ate up miles without wearing out the horses. The Nevada Territory landscape stretched around them, harsh and beautiful, mountains rising in the distance like ancient sentinels. "How long have you been a scout?" Willa asked when the silence began to feel too heavy. "About 5 years," Ryder said, "since I was 19. My father was a scout before me. He taught me everything, how to read the land, how to find water, how to survive when things go wrong." "Was," Willa caught the past tense. "He died 3 years ago. Pneumonia. Caught it during a bad winter crossing through the mountains." Ryder's voice was matter-of-fact, but Willa heard the pain underneath. "My mother followed him 6 months later. Doctors said it was her heart, but I think she just didn't want to be here without him." "I'm sorry," Willa said softly. "It's strange, isn't it, being alone in the world?" "Yeah," Ryder agreed. "It is." They stopped at midday to rest the horses and eat a cold lunch. Willa was acutely aware of how much she must look like a disaster, her dress torn and dirty, her blonde hair tangled and full of dust. She tried to finger-comb it into some semblance of order, but it was hopeless without water and a proper brush. "There's a creek about 2 hours ahead," Ryder said, as if reading her mind. "You'll have a chance to wash up if you want." "That obvious?" Willa asked, managing a weak smile. "You've had a rough few days," Ryder said diplomatically. When they reached the creek, Ryder took the horses upstream to drink, while Willa claimed a spot behind some rocks for privacy. The water was cold enough to make her gasp, but it felt glorious to wash the dust and sweat from her skin, to rinse her hair and braid it back in a single plait down her back. She was pulling on her boots when she heard Ryder call out a warning. "Someone coming. 3 riders from the south." Willa's heart stopped. The men who killed her father, who chased her into the wilderness. It had to be them. She scrambled up the bank to find Ryder standing near the horses, his rifle held loosely in his hands. His posture was relaxed, but Willa could see the tension in his shoulders. "Get behind me," he said quietly when she reached his side. "And keep your hand on that gun in your belt, but don't draw it unless I tell you to." The 3 riders appeared a moment later, cresting a small rise and heading straight for the creek. Willa's breath caught. She recognized the man in the lead, a brutal-looking character with a scar running down his left cheek. He'd been at the ranch. He'd been one of the men laughing while her father died. "Easy," Ryder murmured, so quietly only she could hear. "Don't let them see you're scared." The riders pulled up about 20 feet away, their horses blowing hard. They'd been riding fast, pushing their mounts. "Afternoon," the scarred man said, touching the brim of his hat in a mockery of politeness. His eyes slid over Ryder and locked onto Willa. Recognition flared in them, followed by something that made her skin crawl. "Well, well, been looking for you, Miss Zimmerman." "Ladies with me," Ryder said, his voice level and cold, "and we don't have any business with you." "See, that's where you're wrong," Scarface said. "We have unfinished business with the lady. Her daddy stole something that belongs to our boss, and we mean to get it back." "My father never stole anything in his life," Willa said, her voice shaking with anger rather than fear now. "You killed him for nothing." "That's between you and your conscience," Ryder interrupted. "But the lady says she doesn't have what you're looking for, and I believe her. So you boys can turn around and ride back the way you came." One of the other men laughed. "That's real chivalrous of you, friend, but you're outnumbered. Why don't you just ride away and let us have our conversation with the lady in private?" Ryder's rifle came up in one smooth motion, the barrel pointing directly at Scarface's chest. "I don't think so." The cheerfulness drained from the men's faces. Scarface's hand dropped to his gun, but he didn't draw it. The standoff hung in the balance, tension thick enough to choke on. "You really want to die for some girl you just met?" Scarface asked. "I really want to make sure she's safe," Ryder said. "How this goes is up to you." Willa's hand was on her father's revolver now, her palm slick with sweat. She'd never shot at a person before, only targets and the occasional coyote threatening their livestock. But she knew with absolute certainty that she'd pull the trigger if these men moved on Ryder. The moment stretched out, each second feeling like an eternity. Then Scarface hawked and spat into the dust. "You're making a mistake, friend. Our boss doesn't forget and he doesn't forgive." "I'll take my chances," Ryder said. With a jerk of his head, Scarface wheeled his horse around. The other two followed, but not before shooting dark looks at both Ryder and Willa. They rode off heading east, in the direction of Virginia City rather than south toward Willa's ranch. Ryder didn't lower his rifle until they were out of sight. Even then, he kept scanning the horizon, his body still tense. "Thank you," Willa breathed. "They would have killed me." "Maybe," Ryder said. "Or maybe they want to use you to find whatever it is they think your father had." He finally looked at her, and his expression was serious. "Is there any possibility your father did have something? Maybe something he didn't tell you about?" Willa started to shake her head, then stopped. A memory surfaced from about a month before her father died. He'd come home late one night, looking worried and carrying a small leather pouch. She'd asked him what was wrong, but he just told her not to worry, that he was taking care of something for an old friend. "Maybe," she admitted reluctantly. "About a month ago, my father went to Virginia City. He came back with a small pouch, maybe the size of my hand. He hid it somewhere, but he never told me where." Ryder swore under his breath. "What was in it?" "I don't know. I never saw inside it. But those men think you do know, which means they're not going to give up." Ryder was already moving toward the horses. "We need to get to Unionville quickly. Once we're there, we can figure out what to do next." They rode hard for the rest of the day, only stopping when the horses absolutely needed rest. Willa could feel the weight of Ryder's concern, the way he constantly checked their back trail, the tense set of his shoulders. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Ryder turned them off the main trail and into a narrow canyon. "We'll camp here," he said. "No fire tonight. I don't want to advertise our location." It was a cold, uncomfortable night. They ate dried beef and hardtack, washing it down with water that tasted of dust. Ryder insisted Willa take both blankets while he kept watch, and she was too exhausted to argue much beyond a token protest. But sleep didn't come easily. Every sound made her jump, certain that Scarface and his men had found them. And when she did finally drift off, her dreams were full of gunfire and her father's screams. She woke to find Ryder sitting near her, his hand gentle on her shoulder. "You were dreaming," he said quietly. "Nightmares." Willa nodded, not trusting her voice. In the pre-dawn darkness, she could barely see Ryder's face, but she felt the warmth of his presence, solid and reassuring. "I know something about nightmares," Ryder said. "After my parents died, I had them every night for months. Kept seeing my father's face, kept reliving those last moments when he was struggling to breathe." He was quiet for a moment. "They fade eventually, never quite go away, but they get easier to bear." "How?" Willa asked. "How do you make it easier? You keep living," Ryder said simply. "You get up every morning and you keep going, and eventually the good moments start to outnumber the bad ones." Willa found her hand reaching for his, and he took it without hesitation. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip firm and steady. They sat like that in the darkness, not speaking, just sharing the quiet comfort of not being alone. When dawn broke, they were riding again. Ryder set a brutal pace, and Willa struggled to keep up. Her body ached from days in the saddle, her hands blistered from gripping the horse's mane, but she didn't complain. She could see the tension in Ryder's face, the way his eyes constantly scanned the horizon. They crested a ridge around mid-morning, and Ryder pulled up short. In the distance, Willa could see a collection of buildings clustered in a valley, smoke rising from chimneys, the glint of sunlight on windows. "Unionville," Ryder said, and there was relief in his voice. "We'll be safe there." As they descended toward the town, Willa felt her own relief mixing with uncertainty. She'd be safe from Scarface and his men, at least temporarily. But then what? She had no money, no skills beyond ranch work, and no real plan for her future. Unionville was bigger than Willa had expected, easily a few hundred people. The mining boom had brought prosperity, evidenced by the sturdy buildings lining Main Street, the busy saloons and general stores, even a church with a proper steeple. Ryder led them to a livery stable on the edge of town, where a grizzled old man with a limp took charge of their horses. "Good to see you back, Ryder," the man said. "Heard you were guiding some miners up to the Silver Hills." "That's next week, Tom," Ryder said. "Right now, I need a favor. The lady needs a safe place to stay, and I need to know if anyone's been asking about a woman traveling alone." Tom's eyes sharpened, taking in Willa's disheveled appearance and the way she stayed close to Ryder. "Haven't heard anything, but I'll keep my ears open. As for a place, Mrs. Patterson at the boarding house is always looking for help. She might be willing to trade room and board for work." "Appreciate it," Ryder said. He turned to Willa. "Come on, let's see if we can get you settled, Mrs. Patterson turned out to be a stern-looking woman in her 50s with iron-gray hair and a no-nonsense attitude. But her eyes softened when Ryder explained that Willa needed work and a safe place to stay, even if he was vague about the specific reasons. "I can always use help with the cooking and cleaning," Mrs. Patterson said, looking Willa up and down. "But I run a respectable establishment. No drinking, no men in your room, and I expect my girls to be at breakfast by 6. "Yes, madam," Willa said. "I'll work hard, I promise." "See that you do." Mrs. Patterson gestured toward the stairs. "Room 3 is empty. It's not much, but it's clean and the roof doesn't leak. Meals are included and you'll get Sunday afternoons off." It was more than Willa had dared hope for. She felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you." "Thank you so much." Mrs. Patterson's expression softened slightly. "You look dead on your feet, girl. Why don't you go up and rest? You can start fresh tomorrow morning." Ryder followed Willa upstairs, carrying the small bag of supplies he'd insisted on buying for her at the general store. The room was indeed small, barely enough space for a narrow bed, a washstand, and a trunk. But it had a window that looked out over Main Street, and the bed had clean sheets and a real quilt. "It's perfect," Willa said, and meant it. Ryder set the bag on the trunk and moved toward the door, then hesitated. "I'll be at the Silver Dollar Saloon if you need anything. That's where I usually stay when I'm in town. Just send word through Tom at the livery." "Wait," Willa said as he reached for the door handle. "I don't know how to thank you. You saved my life. You didn't have to help me, but you did, and I'll never forget that." "You don't owe me anything," Ryder said, but his gray eyes were warm. "I'm just glad you're safe." "Will I see you again?" Willa asked, and hated how uncertain her voice sounded. "I'll check on you tomorrow," Ryder promised. "Make sure you're settling in all right." After he left, Willa sank down onto the bed and finally let herself cry. But these tears were different from the ones she'd shed before. Mixed in with the grief and fear was something else. Hope, maybe, fragile and uncertain, but there nonetheless. The next week passed in a blur of hard work. Mrs. Patterson kept her boarding house running with military precision, and she expected her help to match her standards. Willa spent her days washing sheets, preparing meals, scrubbing floors, and serving the boarders their breakfast and dinner. It was exhausting work, but Willa threw herself into it gratefully. Being busy meant less time to think about her father, less time to remember those terrible last days at the ranch. And Mrs. Patterson, for all her stern manner, was fair and occasionally even kind. Ryder stopped by every afternoon, usually around the time Willa was taking her break. They'd sit on the boarding house's front porch and talk, conversations that ranged from the mundane to the deeply personal. Willa learned that Ryder had grown up in Colorado territory, that his mother had been a school teacher before she married his father, that he loved the wild spaces, but sometimes felt lonely in them. In turn, Willa told him about her childhood on the ranch, about her mother's death and how her father had never quite recovered from it, about her dreams of maybe teaching school someday or opening a shop of her own. "You'd be good at teaching," Ryder said one afternoon. "You're patient and you explain things clearly." "I'd need more education myself first," Willa said. "My mother taught me to read and write and do figures, but that's about it." "There are books at the library in Carson City," Ryder said, "not too far from here. Maybe someday you could go there, study on your own." "Maybe," Willa said, but the future still felt impossibly uncertain. She hadn't forgotten about Scarface and his men, but as the days passed with no sign of them, Willa began to relax slightly. Maybe they'd given up. Maybe they'd decided she wasn't worth the trouble. Then, 2 weeks after her arrival in Unionville, Ryder came to the boarding house looking grim. "We need to talk," he said, leading her away from the porch and toward the livery stable where they could speak privately. "Tom heard some things. There are men in Virginia City asking about a blonde woman traveling with a scout. They're offering money for information." Willa felt her stomach drop. "Scarface, probably, or whoever he works for." Ryder was pacing now, restless energy in every movement. "The good news is they're looking in the wrong place. But eventually, someone's going to connect the dots and point them this direction." "What do I do?" Willa asked, fighting down panic. "You could leave, go further west," Ryder said. "Or we could end this." "End it how?" "By giving them what they want." Ryder stopped pacing and faced her. "You said your father hid something. Maybe it's time to find out what and where." "But I don't know where he hid it," Willa protested. "You know the ranch. You know your father. Maybe if you went back you could figure it out." The thought of returning to the ranch, to the place where her father died, made Willa feel sick. But Ryder was right. Running would only delay the inevitable. These men weren't going to stop looking for her as long as they thought she had something they wanted. "When would we go?" she asked. "Tomorrow, if you're willing. We can be there and back in a week if we push hard." Willa took a deep breath. "Then let's do it, Mrs. Patterson wasn't happy about Willa requesting time away so soon after starting work. but she agreed grudgingly when Ryder offered to pay for a temporary replacement. They left at dawn the next morning, each leading a spare horse in case they needed to move quickly. The journey south felt surreal, retracing the path Willa had ridden in blind panic just 2 weeks earlier. 3 days of hard riding brought them to familiar territory. Willa's chest tightened as she recognized landmarks, the oddly shaped rock formation her father had called the Eagle's Perch, the dried-up creek bed where she'd once found an arrowhead, the stand of juniper trees that marked the beginning of their property. The ranch came into view in the late afternoon sun, and Willa had to blink back tears. The house was a blackened shell, collapsed in on itself. The barn was gone entirely, just a few charred posts still standing. Even the corrals had been destroyed, rails broken and scattered. "Take your time," Ryder said gently. "I'll keep watch." Willa dismounted and walked slowly toward the ruins. Everything was gone, all the accumulated memories of her childhood reduced to ash and charred wood. She picked through the debris carefully, but there was nothing to salvage. The heat of the fire had been intense enough to melt glass and warp metal. "Where would your father have hidden something?" Ryder asked, scanning the surrounding area. "Somewhere the fire wouldn't have reached." Willa thought hard, trying to remember that night her father had come home with the mysterious pouch. He'd been worried. She remembered that clearly. Worried and secretive. And the next day, he'd spent hours in the barn, doing what she'd assumed was routine repair work. "The barn," she said suddenly. "There was a loose board in the tack room floor. My father used to hide money there, just a few dollars in case of emergency." The tack room had been on the far end of the barn, and while most of the structure had burned, that corner had partially survived. Willa and Ryder picked their way through the wreckage carefully, testing each step before putting their full weight down. The floor was mostly intact, though charred and weakened. Willa found the spot she was looking for and dropped to her knees, working at the board with her fingers until Ryder produced a knife and levered it up. There, in the shallow space between floor joists, was a leather pouch. Willa picked it up with shaking hands. It was heavier than she'd expected, and something inside shifted with a sound like marbles rolling. She loosened the drawstring and tipped the contents into her palm. Stones. But not just any stones. Even in the fading light, they caught the sun and threw it back in brilliant flashes of color. Diamonds, Willa realized with shock. Raw diamonds, at least 24 of them. "God in heaven," Ryder breathed. "That's a fortune." "I don't understand," Willa said. "Where would my father have gotten these?" "Does it matter?" Ryder asked. "What matters is that now we know what those men are after." A voice spoke from behind them. "Exactly right." Willa and Ryder spun around to find Scarface standing at the edge of the barn ruins, his gun drawn and pointed directly at them. The other 2 men flanked him on either side, also armed. "Been following you since you left Unionville," Scarface said with an ugly grin. "Figured you'd lead us right to what we wanted eventually. Hand over the pouch, nice and slow." Ryder's hand moved toward his own gun, but Scarface made a warning sound. "Don't be stupid." "You're fast, I'll give you that, but you ain't faster than 3 bullets. "How did you find us in Unionville?" Willa asked, trying to buy time to think. "Had men checking every town within 100 miles, Scarface said. "Your friend there made the mistake of buying you supplies." Store clerk remembered a scout buying women's things, and that was enough. He gestured impatiently. "Now quit stalling and hand over the stones." Willa looked at Ryder, saw the calculation in his eyes. They were outgunned and out of position, but she could see him working through possibilities, looking for any advantage. "What happens after we give you the diamonds?" Ryder asked. "You just going to let us walk away?" "Sure," Scarface said, not even pretending to sound convincing. You give me the stones and we all go our separate ways." "You're a terrible liar," Ryder said. Scarface shrugged. "Makes no difference. You're giving me those stones one way or another. Either you hand them over and die quick, or we take them off your bodies. Your choice." In that moment, several things happened at once. Ryder grabbed Willa and pulled her behind a section of standing wall, his gun clearing leather with incredible speed. Scarface fired, the bullet splintering wood inches from where they'd been standing. Ryder returned fire and one of Scarface's men went down with a cry. "Run for the horses," Ryder shouted at Willa. "Get to town and find the sheriff." "I'm not leaving you," Willa yelled back, more gunfire, deafening in the confined space. Willa pulled her father's revolver from her belt with shaking hands. She'd never been in a gunfight, didn't know if she had it in her to actually shoot someone, but she wasn't going to hide while Ryder fought alone. She peered around the edge of the wall and saw Scarface and the remaining man taking cover behind what was left of a wagon. Ryder was pinned down, unable to move without exposing himself to fire. Willa aimed at the wagon and pulled the trigger. The gun's recoil jolted through her arm, and her shot went wide, but it had the desired effect. Scarface ducked, and in that moment, Ryder moved, getting to better cover behind a pile of stones that had once been the barn's foundation. "You're only making this harder on yourselves," Scarface called out. "Give up the stones and I'll make it quick." "Go to hell," Ryder shouted back. The standoff continued, bullets flying back and forth. Willa fired again, this time aiming more carefully. Her bullet struck the wagon wheel near where Scarface was hiding, and she heard him curse. Then she heard something else. Hoofbeats, multiple horses coming fast. Scarface heard it too. His head snapped around and Willa saw fear flash across his face. "We're out of time," he snarled to his companion. "Take them both down now." They came out of cover firing, a desperate assault that had Willa and Ryder ducking behind their respective shelters. Willa heard a bullet whine past her head, felt splinters of wood pepper her face. She fired back blindly, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst. Then the new arrivals were there, 5 men on horseback, and Willa recognized Tom from the livery at their head. They came in with guns drawn, and suddenly the odds had shifted dramatically. Scarface and his man didn't hesitate. They broke and ran for their horses, firing wild shots behind them as they fled. Tom and his men pursued, their shots echoing across the valley as the chase disappeared over a ridge. Ryder was at Willa's side in an instant. "Are you hit? Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," Willa gasped, though her whole body was shaking. "How did they find us?" "I left word with Tom about where we were going," Ryder said. "Told him to send help if we weren't back in 5 days. Must have got worried and came early." Tom and his men returned a few minutes later looking grim. "Lost them in the rocks," Tom said, dismounting. "But they won't be coming back anytime soon, not after seeing how many guns we brought." He looked at the man Ryder had shot, who lay still in the dirt. "This one's dead. Anyone know him?" "Works for someone in Virginia City," Ryder said. "That's all we know." "Well, we'll take the body to the sheriff in town, file a report," Tom said. "You two all right?" Willa realized she was still clutching the pouch of diamonds. She held it up mutely, and Tom's eyes widened. "So that's what this was all about," he said softly. "That's enough trouble for a dozen lifetimes." "My father was keeping it for someone," Willa said. "At least I think he was. I can't imagine he'd steal something like this." "Doesn't much matter now," Tom said practically. "Question is, what are you going to do with them?" Willa looked at Ryder. "I don't know, they're not mine. They belong to whoever my father got them from." "Then we find out who that was," Ryder said. "Someone must know. Someone must have trusted your father enough to give him a fortune in diamonds to hide." They returned to Unionville the next day, bringing the dead man's body wrapped in canvas. The sheriff, a middle-aged man named Williams, took their statements and promised to investigate, though he seemed skeptical about finding the men who'd attacked them. "Virginia City's outside my jurisdiction," he said. "But I'll send a telegram to the sheriff there, let him know what's going on. In the meantime, you two best be careful. Men who kill over that kind of money don't give up easy." Willa returned to the boarding house exhausted and shaken, but Mrs. Patterson surprised her with unexpected sympathy. "Heard about your trouble," the older woman said. "You take tomorrow off, rest up. The work will still be here when you're ready." That night, Willa lay in her small room and tried to process everything that had happened. She'd been shot at. She'd shot back. A man had died. And she still had no idea what to do with the diamonds that had caused so much death and violence. A soft knock on her door made her sit up. "Come in," she called, expecting Mrs. Patterson. Instead, it was Ryder. He looked uncomfortable standing in the doorway of her room. "I know it's not proper me being here," he said, "but I wanted to make sure you were really all right." "I'm not sure," Willa admitted. "I keep seeing that man fall, I keep hearing the gunshots." Ryder stepped into the room, leaving the door open for propriety's sake, and sat in the room's single chair. "That won't go away quickly," he said. "Taking a life, even in self-defense, it stays with you." "Have you ever killed someone?" Willa asked. "Twice," Ryder said quietly. "Once when I was 20, a man tried to rob the wagon train I was guiding. And once last year, claim jumpers who tried to kill a mining party I was working for." He was silent for a moment. "It doesn't get easier, and anyone who says it does is lying, but you did what you had to do to survive." "That's nothing to be ashamed of." Willa felt tears start to flow. "I just want this to be over. I want those men to stop chasing me. I want my father back. I want everything to be the way it was." Ryder moved to sit beside her on the bed, and when he put his arm around her shoulders, Willa turned into the embrace, crying against his chest while he held her and murmured soft reassurances. When her tears finally subsided, Willa became aware of how close they were, of the warmth of Ryder's body against hers, the steady beat of his heart under her cheek. She looked up and found him watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. "Willa," he said softly, and there was a question in the way he said her name. She answered by lifting her face to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, both of them uncertain. Then it deepened, and Willa felt something ignite inside her, a heat that had nothing to do with the summer night. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ryder rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since the day I found you," he admitted. "Why didn't you?" Willa asked. "Because you'd been through hell, and the last thing you needed was me adding to your problems." He pulled back slightly, looking into her eyes. "I'm not good at pretty words, Willa. I don't know how to court a woman proper, but I know that when I'm with you, I feel like I've found something I didn't even know I was missing." "I feel the same way," Willa whispered. "You make me feel safe. Not just physically, but like it's all right to be scared, to be hurt, to not have all the answers." They kissed again, and this time there was no hesitation, just the desperate need to be close to someone, to feel alive after coming so close to death. When Ryder's hands moved to her waist, Willa didn't stop him. When she began unbuttoning his shirt, he helped her. They made love slowly, carefully, learning each other's bodies in the dim moonlight filtering through the window. It was Willa's first time, and there was pain, but there was also tenderness in the way Ryder touched her, a reverence that made her feel cherished rather than used. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, both knowing Ryder would have to leave before dawn to preserve Willa's reputation, but unwilling to break the connection quite yet. "Stay with me," Willa said quietly. "Not just tonight, but always." Let's figure out this thing with the diamonds together and then let's build a life together." "You sure?" Ryder asked. "I don't have much to offer. A scout's life isn't easy and there's not much money in it." "I don't care about money," Willa said. "I care about you." "Then yes," Ryder said, kissing her forehead. "Yes, I'll stay. I'll stay as long as you'll have me." He left before dawn, as they both knew he must, but he returned that afternoon with a determined look on his face. "I've been thinking about the diamonds," he said. "Your father must have gotten them from someone local, someone who trusted him. And diamonds like that, raw and uncut, they probably came from a mine." "There are dozens of mines around here," Willa said doubtfully. "Yes, but how many of them have found diamonds?" Ryder countered. "Most of the mines here are silver and gold. Diamonds are rare. Someone at the assay office might know." The assay office was a small building near the center of town, run by a fastidious man named Mr. Grayson who peered at them over wire-rimmed spectacles. "Diamonds," he said when Ryder asked. "From the mines around here. That's unusual, very unusual," he thought for a moment. "There was talk a few months back, whispers really, about a claim up in the mountains east of here. Man named Jackson hit a pocket of them, or so the story went. But he was keeping it quiet, didn't want to start a rush." "This Jackson, he's still around?" Ryder asked. "Died about 6 weeks ago," Grayson said. "Heart gave out on him. His daughter took over the claim, but I heard she's selling it, can't work it on her own. 6 weeks ago. Right around the time Willa's father had gone to Virginia City. The pieces were starting to come together." "Where can we find the daughter?" Willa asked. "Last I heard, she was staying at the hotel in Virginia City, trying to find a buyer for the claim," Grayson said. Virginia City was 2 days' ride north. Willa and Ryder left the next morning, after Willa had again secured reluctant permission from Mrs. Patterson for time away. The town was bigger and rougher than Unionville, swollen with fortune seekers and the businesses that catered to them. The hotel was one of the nicer buildings, a 3-story structure with actual glass windows and a lobby that tried for elegance. The clerk at the desk confirmed that a Miss Jackson was staying there, and a few minutes later, Willa and Ryder were sitting in the hotel's small parlor across from a woman in her early 30s with tired eyes and mourning clothes. "My father mentioned a man named Zimmerman," Sarah Jackson said after they'd explained why they'd come. "Said he was honest, a man who could be trusted. Papa found a rich pocket of diamonds in his claim, but he was afraid word would get out. He gave your father a portion of them to hide, insurance in case something happened to him." "Do you know who else knew about the diamonds?" Ryder asked. Sarah's face darkened. "Papa's partner, a man named Crane. When Papa died, Crane tried to force me to sell him the claim for a fraction of what it was worth. When I refused, he threatened me. I went to the sheriff, but Crane has friends in this town. Nothing was done." "Crane," Willa said. "Does he have a scar on his face?" Sarah looked surprised. "His foreman does. Nasty piece of work named Garrett." "Why?" "Because Garrett and his men killed my father trying to get those diamonds," Willa said. "And they've been hunting me ever since." Sarah went pale. "Oh God, this is my fault. If I just sold Crane the claim like he wanted." "Then he would have gotten away with murder and extortion," Ryder said firmly. "No, this ends now. We take what we know to the sheriff. With both of you as witnesses, he'll have to act." But the Virginia City sheriff was less help than they'd hoped. He listened to their story with increasing skepticism, and when they finished, he shook his head. "What you have is a lot of accusations and no proof," he said. "You say this Garrett killed Miss Zimmerman's father, but you have no witnesses. You say Crane is behind it, but again, no proof. As for the diamonds, for all I know, you stole them yourselves." "That's ridiculous," Willa protested. "Maybe so, but it's your word against Crane's, and Crane is a respected businessman in this town. The sheriff leaned back in his chair. "My advice. Take those diamonds, sell them, and leave this territory. Go somewhere Crane can't find you." "So you're just going to let him get away with murder?" Ryder said, his voice cold with anger. "I'm telling you the reality of the situation," the sheriff said. "I can't arrest someone based on suspicion. Bring me proof and I'll act. Until then, there's nothing I can do." They left the sheriff's office frustrated and angry, but as they walked back toward the hotel, Ryder suddenly grabbed Willa's arm and pulled her into an alley. "What is it?" she asked. "Garrett," Ryder said quietly. "Across the street, going into the Gold Strike Saloon, and if I'm not mistaken, that's Crane with him." Willa peered around Ryder's shoulder. She saw Garrett clearly, his scarred face unmistakable. The man with him was older, well-dressed in a suit that looked expensive, with the confident bearing of someone used to power. "We need to follow them," Willa said. "Too risky," Ryder said. "They'd spot us immediately." "Then we need to figure out another way to get proof of what they've done," Willa said. They spent the rest of the day making a plan. It was risky, possibly stupid, but it was the only option they could come up with. That night, after the town had settled into its rowdy evening routine, Willa and Ryder made their way to Crane's office, a building near the mining company headquarters. Breaking in was easier than expected. The lock on the back door was cheap, and Ryder had it open in less than a minute. Inside, they lit a small lamp and began searching. Crane's office was neat and organized, file cabinets lining one wall, a large desk dominating the center of the room. Ryder started on the file cabinets while Willa went through the desk. It was in the bottom drawer, hidden under a false bottom, that Willa found it. A leather ledger, and inside, meticulous records of payments made to Garrett and his men, including one dated the day after her father's death with the notation, "Zimmerman problem resolved." "I've got something," Willa said, her hands shaking as she held up the ledger. Ryder was at her side instantly, reading over her shoulder. "This is it. This is the proof we need." They were so focused on the ledger that neither of them heard the door open. They didn't realize they weren't alone until a gun cocked behind them. Well, Crane's smooth voice said. "Thought you two might try something like this. Garrett said you were persistent." Willa and Ryder turned slowly to find Crane and Garrett standing in the doorway, both armed. But this time, Ryder had been ready for trouble. His hand was already moving toward his gun when Crane spoke. "Don't," Crane said. "Garrett's faster than he looks, and I'd hate for this to turn messy." "It's already messy," Ryder said. "You've got a trail of bodies behind you, and now we have proof." He gestured to the ledger Willa still held. Crane's face tightened. "That ledger doesn't prove anything that would stand up in court, but it does prove you broke into my office, which gives me every right to shoot you as burglars." "Except we're not alone," a new voice said from behind Crane. Everyone turned to see Sheriff Williams from Unionville standing in the doorway, along with Tom from the livery and 3 other armed men. "Got your telegram, Ryder," Williams said, his gun trained on Crane. "Figured you might need backup, so we rode through the night." He looked at the Virginia City Sheriff, who had appeared behind him looking confused and angry. "Found your sheriff on the way in. Once we explained the situation, he agreed to come along." The Virginia City Sheriff looked at the ledger, then at Crane. "Is what they're saying true? Did you order the death of Isaac Zimmerman?" "Of course not," Crane blustered. "This is all a misunderstanding." "Then you won't mind if we take a look at that ledger," Williams said. Over the next hour, with both sheriffs present, the full story came out. Crane had known about Jackson's diamond find and had tried to muscle in on it. When Jackson refused to be intimidated, Crane had somehow hastened his death, though they couldn't prove it. Then, knowing Jackson had given diamonds to Isaac Zimmerman for safekeeping. Crane had sent Garrett to retrieve them. The ledger contained enough evidence of other crimes, bribes paid and threats made, to build a case against Crane. Garrett, faced with hanging for murder, turned on his boss and confessed everything in exchange for a lighter sentence. It was over. Willa and Ryder stayed in Virginia City for 2 more weeks while the legal proceedings played out. Sarah Jackson, grateful for their help, insisted on giving them a share of the diamonds as thanks for bringing her father's killers to justice. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to start a new life. "What do you want to do?" Ryder asked Willa one evening as they walked through Virginia City streets. "You could go anywhere now, back east to find your aunt or to San Francisco or anywhere else you can imagine." "I want to go back to Unionville," Willa said. "I want to marry you if you'll have me. And then I want to figure out what comes next together." Ryder stopped walking and turned to face her. "Are you sure? Because once you marry me, you're stuck with a man who's more comfortable sleeping under stars than in a bed, who doesn't know the first thing about being a proper husband." "I'm sure," Willa said. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." They were married a month later in Unionville's small church, with Mrs. Patterson standing up as Willa's witness and Tom serving as Ryder's. It was a simple ceremony, but Willa had never felt happier than when Ryder slipped a simple gold band on her finger and kissed her as his wife. With their share of the diamond money, they bought a small house on the edge of Unionville, a place with room for the horses and a good-sized garden. Ryder continued his work as a scout, but he started taking shorter jobs, ones that kept him closer to home. Willa got her wish to continue learning, ordering books from back east and studying everything from literature to mathematics. A year after their wedding, Willa gave birth to a son they named Isaac, after her father. He had Ryder's gray eyes and Willa's blonde hair, and he was the most perfect thing either of them had ever seen. 2 years later, a daughter arrived, whom they named Rose. She was dark-haired like her father and had a stubborn streak a mile wide that made them both laugh even when it drove them crazy. Life wasn't always easy. There were lean winters when Ryder's work dried up, and there was the summer when Rose nearly died from fever. But they faced everything together, and somehow that made even the hardest times bearable. On their 5th anniversary, Ryder surprised Willa by taking her to Carson City, where he'd arranged for her to take the teaching examination. She passed with high marks, and the following fall, Unionville's new schoolhouse opened with Willa as its teacher. She taught reading and writing and arithmetic to children of miners and ranchers and shopkeepers, and she loved every moment of it. In the evenings, she'd come home to find Ryder playing with Isaac and Rose in the yard, or preparing dinner if he was between jobs, or just waiting for her with that smile that still made her heart skip a beat. Years passed. Isaac grew tall and serious, with his father's quiet competence and his mother's love of learning. Rose grew into a beautiful young woman with her mother's determination and her father's adventurous spirit. They both left eventually, Isaac to study law in San Francisco and Rose to marry a young doctor and move to Denver. Willa and Ryder, alone again in their house, found they didn't mind the quiet. They'd been blessed with good children, good lives, good health. They'd built something real and lasting from the ashes of tragedy. On their 25th anniversary, Willa and Ryder rode out to the spot where he'd first found her, that place in the wilderness where her old life had ended and her new one had begun. They'd camped there overnight, and as they sat by the fire under a canopy of stars, Willa thought about how far they'd come. "You ever regret it?" she asked. Taking in a strange woman who brought nothing but trouble, Ryder pulled her closer against his side. "Not for a single second. You were the best kind of trouble. "I was terrified that night," Willa admitted. "I thought I was going to die out there alone." "But you didn't," Ryder said. "You survived, you fought, you built a life worth living." "We built a life," Willa corrected. Together, Ryder agreed. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn down to embers. Willa thought about that scared, desperate girl she'd been, running through the darkness with no hope. She thought about the man who'd offered her safety and trust when she'd had no reason to trust anyone. She thought about the love that had grown between them, slow and steady and strong as oak. "Thank you," Willa said softly. "For what?" "For keeping your promise. Your camp was safe. I could trust you. Not just until morning, but for every morning after." Ryder's arm tightened around her. "And you'll be able to trust me for every morning that's still to come. That's a promise too." As the stars wheeled overhead and the Nevada wilderness stretched around them, Willa Ashford rested her head on her husband's shoulder and felt entirely, completely at peace. The scared girl in the darkness was long gone. In her place was a woman who'd found love in the most unexpected place, who'd built a family from loss, who'd discovered that sometimes the worst nights lead to the brightest mornings. Isaac and Rose both returned to Unionville eventually. Isaac to practice law and Rose to raise her growing family near her parents. The house that had seemed so quiet filled again with the sounds of grandchildren laughing and playing, their voices echoing the joy Isaac and Rose had brought years before. Willa retired from teaching at 60, though she continued to tutor children who needed extra help, never charging the families who couldn't afford to pay. Ryder had given up his scouting work years earlier, but he'd found a new purpose training young men in wilderness survival, passing on the skills his father had taught him. They grew old together, their hair turning silver, their steps becoming slower, but their love never diminishing. They celebrated their 50th anniversary surrounded by their children and grandchildren. And when someone asked Ryder what the secret was to a happy marriage, he'd simply reached for Willa's hand and said, "Find someone who makes you want to be better than you are, and then spend every day trying to deserve them." Willa laughed at that. "And find someone who makes you feel safe," she added. "Not just physically, but safe enough to be completely yourself." On a warm September morning, much like the one when they'd first met all those decades ago, Willa and Ryder sat on the porch of their house, watching their great-grandchildren chase each other around the yard. The little ones didn't know the story of how their great-grandparents had met. Not yet. They were too young to understand about danger and loss and the strange ways fate worked. But someday, they'd be told. They'd hear about the cowboy who found a woman stranded in the wilderness and offered her safety and trust. They'd hear about how that chance meeting had blossomed into a love that lasted a lifetime. They'd learn that sometimes the darkest moments in our lives lead us exactly where we're meant to be. As the sun climbed higher and the day grew warm, Ryder took Willa's hand, just as he'd done countless times over the decades. She squeezed back, and in that simple gesture was everything they'd built together. Trust and love and partnership. A family. A life. It was everything Willa had thought she'd lost that terrible night when men killed her father and burned her home. But from those ashes, something beautiful had grown. Not because the tragedy hadn't happened, but because she'd found someone who'd helped her survive it, who'd stood beside her through every trial that followed, who'd shown her that endings could also be beginnings. Years later, when Willa Ashford passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 87, Ryder held her hand one final time. He followed her just 3 months later, his heart unable to keep beating without her. They were buried side by side in Unionville's cemetery, under a shared headstone that read simply, "Together through all things." Their children and great-grandchildren gathered at the graveside, mourning but also celebrating 2 lives well lived. And that evening, as the family gathered at the old house to share memories and stories, Isaac told the youngest ones about the night his father had found his mother in the wilderness, had offered her safety, had kept his promise. The children listened with wide eyes, and when the story was finished, one of them asked, "But how did Grandpa know Grandma would be special? How did he know to help her?" Isaac smiled, thinking of his parents and the love he'd witnessed throughout his entire life. "I think," he said, "that the best people don't wait to know someone's special before they help. They help because it's the right thing to do. And if you're lucky, very lucky, that kindness leads to something beautiful." It was the perfect answer, and it was the perfect legacy. Ryder and Willa Ashford had built their love on a foundation of trust and kindness, and they'd passed those values down through generations. Long after they were gone, their story lived on, a reminder that even in the darkest wilderness, light could be found. Sometimes you just had to trust a stranger who said, "My camp is safe. You can trust me until morning." Because sometimes, until morning turned into forever, and that was the greatest gift of all.